Hi everyone, my name is Renee. Welcome to my channel. Today's video will be my reading journal cover pages for March and April. For March, I decided to do a fantasy map theme. It seems simple in the sense that it is just a black and white sketch, but it can become quite time consuming at times drawing in all of the small details. I found a medieval font to add in the stats that I track on each of my monthly cover pages. Those stats are the number of books and pages, my average star rating, and my favorite book of the month. I figure up these stats at the end of each month and come back to fill it in. I in no way tried to draw in perfect details on this map. I mostly just wanted to fill space. I originally wanted to just sit down and start doodling, but I ended up going in and pre-drawing what I wanted in pencil before using ink. But before doing that, I wasn't feeling the desire to sit down with the camera rolling while I spent more time thinking than actually drawing. I looked on Pinterest for different ideas of what to add into my fantasy map. Trees are an obvious way to fill space, but some of my favorite add-ins were mountain ranges, grass, paths, and crop fields. This was a spread that looks great on paper and is super fun to do, but it wasn't a process that I really had a lot to say about, which is why it didn't get a video of its own. Regardless of the short video for this spread, it might be one of my favorites that I've ever done. It looks great finished and it fulfills one of my main goals for this year's reading journal, which is to draw more in my spreads. Since this is going in my April video, I was able to add in my monthly stats. In March, I read 19 books, 6,164 pages, had an average rating of 3.42 stars, and my favorite book was Killers of a Certain Age. I started my April cover page at a time when I had just finished a week-long teaching artist residency that rekindled my love for printmaking. I was also listening to ACOTAR again because I was in a little bit of a slump, and I have tried to make sure that I not only find new books to love this year, but also take time to revisit some of my favorites without being ashamed. I decided to take both ACOTAR and printmaking to create my April spread. I drew out my sketch that would be familiar to anyone who has read the ACOTAR series. I was reading book 1 at the time, but I had to create this iconic night court imagery. I used a piece of transfer paper to help you easily transfer your design onto a linoleum block by simply rubbing it with your pencil while the graphite is touching the block. When linoleum block printing, you need to picture what you want your image to look like in the end, and then you have to carve the opposite. Any words or elements have to be carved backwards to appear the correct way on paper. This comes down to personal preference, but I think what looks best in block printing is when you have details in what would otherwise be a flat or solid space. I put horizontal lines in the sky to keep from having a large solid space once printed. This can also be applied to the spaces that you want to be white. You can get some texture in empty spaces by not carving too deep into the block. The imperfections of having some stray lines of ink in the blank spaces can sometimes be what makes the block print feel so personal. To get an idea of what needs to be carved away and what not to carve, I recommend looking at silhouette designs to see what is solid and what is white. On a block print, anything solid won't be carved away. What you want to be white in the end needs to be carved. When using a block printing cutting tool, you want to push it away from your body and you don't want to hold it like you are drawing with a pencil. The tool I'm using here is the smallest one I have in order to get fine details. Don't force the tool to go deeper than the walls of it will allow. That will cause rugged cuts instead of the smooth cuts that they are meant to give you. If you wish to have a deeper or wider cut, switch to a different tool. Using a small tool is great for getting around tight areas, but using a larger tool like this one will save you a lot of time when trying to clear out a larger space. Once I finished carving my linoleum block, I moved over to my journal and began placing in washi tape as decoration. While my block print is themed after the night court, the monthly tracker side is more of a spring court theme since I had just read ACOTAR, and because it was springtime when I made the spread. The washi tapes I picked sort of have a dark academia feel to them, because whenever I think of the spring court manor, I definitely think of some sort of academia. I used my clear stamp set to write in April. These stamps have grown on me, but they're still not my favorite. For my block print, I am using water-soluble block printing ink from Blick Art Materials. To roll out the ink, you need a brayer tool and a sheet of glass or plexi, or a smooth stone block. When rolling out ink, you want to roll the brayer forward, pick it up, place it down, and then roll it back the other way. Rolling it this way rather than continuously rolling without lifting the brayer will ensure that the ink is evenly distributed. For a test print, I am using a simple sheet of printer paper. You would usually use a Baron tool to properly transfer the ink onto paper, but I couldn't find mine, so I used a clean brayer. This works just as well. Once you get a look at your print, you can get a solid idea of where you might need to go back in to make new cuts. Once you're happy with your cut, you can move on to better paper. Heavy cardstock works fine, or you can get paper specifically made for printmaking. I'm using handmade watercolor paper for mine. Once you get a final print, you need to allow quite a long time for it to dry. Even after it seems dry, it might be quite a bit tacky. Mine wasn't fully dry when I started to trim it because I was being impatient and wanted to go home. I moved my print over to my journal and marked out the corners before using my glue roller to hold it in place. I also ended up adding in these black photo corners to make it look less like it was just floating and more like it was meant to be there. I ended up finishing off April with 14 books, 5,390 pages, an average rating of 3.4 out of 5 stars, and my favorite book was Someone Else's Bucket List. For May, I chose to do different types of leaves and plants for my monthly stats. I drew the outline of each one before going around and essentially doing a one-line drawing for a sketchy look. These hanging and potted plants were so fun and therapeutic to do whenever I went in with my fine liner pen. Whenever I was sketching them out, I redrew them several times before I was actually happy with them. I wanted a bit of color, so I used these acrylograph pens from Archer and Olive. I like the 0.7 fine tip pen, but you will see when I color in May that the 3mm tips were absolutely awful and it took way too long to just get the M filled in. Once I switched over to the smaller tip, it started to be a much smoother journey, but it's not ideal for larger spaces. Even though it's still an acrylograph pen, the one that I used for the Y was a completely different consistency and started to rip my paper. Overall, I would not recommend these Archer and Olive pens, but everything else that I've got from them, like their journals, have been wonderful. I ended up loving this monthly spread even though it was made out of laziness and not really wanting to do anything else. In May, I ended up reading 11 books, 4,184 pages. I had an average rating of 3.31 out of 5 stars, and my favorite book was The Predator. Thank you for watching, and I hope that at least one of these designs inspires you in your own journal.